Hey everyone, Steve here once again to do a video on installing Apple's OS X El Capitan on my Hackintosh. Rather than doing an upgrade from Yosemite, I decided to do a clean install of the OS because it's easier, and if you saw my previous video, I recently placed a new processor in my PC and will have needed to install a new copy of the OS anyway. Let me bring up that this will be different from my previous installs of OS X. In my previous two videos, I would normally use Chimera as my bootloader. This was provided by Customac and recommended up until Yosemite came out. Since Yosemite was released, Customac recommended an alternative bootloader called Clover that provides support for UEFI and take advantage of the OS's newer features as the software evolves. Chimera supported Yosemite, but after El Capitan was released, Chimera support was discontinued and forced, at least me, to look into Clover in order to keep up to date with Apple's future OS releases. For my resources, I'm using a post off of TonyMacX86.com provided by user AmMolder. I thank him for taking the time out to provide this info for Hackintosh enthusiasts like me, and will provide a link in the description for the original post for anyone that's interested. Starting with the needed software, of course I'll need the new OS itself, which can be found on the Mac App Store. From the Customac website, I'll need a few things like Unibeast to make the bootable media, EFI Mounter v3 to modify the EFI partition on the hard drive, KexBeast to run .kex files easily, a couple kex for the two Ethernet ports, and a config.plist file, although I found you can get away with using the original one on the system, but it doesn't matter. I also needed to get other software that wasn't provided by Customac, such as the bootloader Clover itself from SourceForge, the Clover Configurator software from altervista.org, and when the Ethernet's up and running, the audio driver plus terminal commands from GitHub, and the most current web driver from my graphics card from Nvidia. After obtaining the software, I started making the bootable media with Unibeast. For that, I formatted an 8GB drive with disk utility with a GUI partition table and a Mac OS extended file system. With that format, I unzipped and ran Unibeast. I chose my recently formatted USB, chose El Capitan as my OS, selected UEFI boot mode, but didn't choose any of the other driver choices. After verifying my selections, I let performance process and have functional USB after about 30 minutes. Before getting to my Hackintosh, I loaded all my drivers and software onto another USB because my boot drive was filled up. I also disconnected my two hard drives and pulled out my graphics card because I felt it was easier to install the OS first without a card, and I didn't want a chance corrupting my other drives. With the USB plugged in, I started up my PC but went to the BIOS and performed some of the suggestions by AmMolder, such as enabling XHCI handoff and EHCI handoff, and changing my initial display output for the onboard graphics. With those changes made, I saved and booted off the USB. I was greeted by the Clover screen and selected the option to go to the installer. From there, I ran the installer but went to disk utility first to format the drive with a GUI partition table and OS X extended format. With that format, I completed the installer, which took less than 15 minutes, restarted the PC, and booted off the USB again to get to the OS. On the Clover screen, the selection for my hard drive appears, so I selected that and eventually got to the new PC setup page, which, after going through, got me to the desktop. That was all pretty much the easy part of the setup. Now I get to start patching. The first tool I started unzipping from my other USB drive is the Clover EFI installer. Going through the regulatory and destination pages, I get to configuration settings. Using the post mentioned earlier, I selected what features will be needed in order for Clover to run properly. Since my camera didn't record it right, I'll post an image of what I used. With the customized settings I picked out, I let the installer do its thing, and when finished I had a new temporary drive called EFI where the bootloader resides with the modifications I made. This drive also contains the original config.plist file for the system if I didn't grab it before. Selecting the temporary drive, I went to the kex folder and deleted all the directories with numbers for names, but left the folder called Other intact. I then took a copy of FakeSMC.kex from my copied USB files and placed it in the Other folder along with the two Ethernet kex in order to have my Ethernet up and running the next time I boot. Next, I got to work editing the config.plist file. To edit the file, this is where the Clover Configurator comes in. As a side note, I had to turn off the setting that only allows Mac App Store apps to run on the PC. This can be found in the Security and Privacy section of the System Preferences. Opening up a copy of the config file, I went to the Boot section located in the left pane and placed the name of my hard drive partition in the default boot volume text box. Under SM BIOS, I had to configure what type of Mac I was using. I want my PC to be labeled as a Mac Pro version 3.1. To do this, I clicked the magic wand button, selected the image of the Mac Pro, and selected the type of Mac Pro from the drop-down menu. While in this menu, I also changed the location, week of manufacture, and the unit number. After clicking OK to that, I copied the serial number, went to RT variables, and pasted the serial number in the text field labeled MLB. I also had to add 5 random digits to the end of the serial number in order to make the value 17 characters, which was a requirement apparently. With that value in there, the config.plist file was ready. I saved a copy of the file in a folder on my desktop and copied that to a Clover directory in the mounted EFI drive. With that copied, I restarted my PC without my installation USB and now boot up to the default Clover screen and then immediately to the OS. So far now, the PC is functioning, but the sound doesn't work yet. The Ethernet drivers technically need to be reinstalled again, and at least according to the forum guide, the power management settings for the processor aren't fully set up. Also, I still haven't installed my graphics card yet, but that'll be done later. To take care of these issues, more patching needs to be done. Starting with the Ethernet, I grabbed the 2 Ethernet kexts and the unzipped KextBeast application and placed them onto the desktop. I then ran KextBeast, which will take any kext files on the desktop and place them in their respective locations in the operating system. I let KextBeast do its thing and restarted when the program was done. When the restart was done, I deleted the kext files and application off my desktop. I then found and unzipped the audio codec file and ran the EFI mounter v3 to remount the EFI volume. With EFI mounted, I clicked on the audio codec file to bring up the terminal window, which prompts to install a codec. I selected yes to confirm the Realtek codec, no to enabling the HD 4600 HDMI audio because I'll be using my GTX 960, yes to audio ID injection, and yes to using audio ID 1. With those selected, the terminal script ran and installed the audio driver. With the audio driver installed, I restarted and then tested the Ethernet ports and audio with Safari when I finished rebooting. Both were a success. To fix the power management, I opened up a window in Safari to a forum post because there will be some commands to copy from there, as well as the GitHub page as mentioned earlier in the video. I also opened a terminal window. I basically copied the first 2 terminal commands from GitHub and ran them in the terminal in order to download a shell script and change the permissions. I then went back to the forum post to copy the terminal command to run the script just downloaded, but saying no to both prompts afterwards. With that done, I remounted the EFI partition with the EFI mounter in a separate window, and went back to the terminal to copy the second command string from the forum post. The command opens a separate window with 2 files I need, SSDT.aml and DSDT.aml. Both these files were copied to the EFI partition in a specific directory placed below. With those 2 files pasted there, I restart again, and now the CPU power management should be fine now thanks to the SSDT, and most motherboard components should be recognized now thanks to the DSDT. The only thing left to take care of is the graphics card drivers and the installation of the card itself. Before installing the drivers, I installed the latest update to the OS through the App Store, which is 10.11.3 at the time of recording this footage. And that was a simple download and restart situation that took less than 15 minutes. With the OS updated, I downloaded and went through the installation prompts to install the Nvidia WebDriver with a restart afterward. In the system preferences, there's a setting now to control which drivers to use. I verified that the system was using the web driver and shut down the PC. While the PC was shut down, I placed in the graphics card again and restarted, but went to the BIOS and set the initial display output back to PCIe. Saving that and rebooting the system, I still got the Clover screen and automatically booted to OS X. With the graphics card working, all that was left was to reattach my other two drives, which I did off camera, and my OS X El Capitan installation would be complete. Since I've been running the system now for a few months, I can say that the Hackintosh has been excellent and reliable for daily use. All of the previous hangups that I've had with the system with the Chimera bootloader are pretty much gone, such as no audio through the HDMI ports, locking up when a USB is read with the top front USB port, and no random kernel panics on startup. The only functions I still don't have are Wi-Fi and Bluetooth capabilities, but I never utilize them on my Windows drive, so it doesn't really matter to me. I know this video is getting long, but before I end it, I ran some quick benchmarks because viewers request them. I first ran Blackmagic disk speed test to see if there was any difference in reading and writing in the OS. For writing, I got an average speed around 410 megabytes per second, and a read speed around 509 megabytes per second. Compared to the scores I got from this test when I was running Yosemite and Chimera, the scores aren't far off from one another. For my next test, I ran Cinebench on both the processor and graphics card and got an OpenGL score of 114.29 FPS and a CPU score of 758 CB. Compared to the other tests I've done with this PC with different OSs and components, you can see that my El Capitan build is very close to my Windows 10 scores I ran in my previous video. When I was running Yosemite and dual booting into Windows, you can tell the PC wasn't using everything it had when I was running OS X. Now, thanks to Clover and all the patches I've done to get El Capitan working, the PC is utilizing all its resources and starting to get on par with my Windows drive. I then ran a Geekbench 32-bit test and got the scores listed here. I also took the time out to list out all the scores from my previous tests. Personally, I really don't care about Geekbench because I would like to use a 64-bit test, but I believe the software costs too much to own and I wouldn't use it much. For my final test, I ran the Unigine Heaven benchmark with render in OpenGL, quality on high, and anti-aliasing at ×2 and got the results listed here. I also ran the same test on my Windows partition and got slightly better results, but again shows how much better performance I'm getting on my OS X partition than I ever had before. So overall, the installation was a success and somewhat simple to do when you have the right post to work with. Initially, I was intimidated by Clover when I first heard about it, but after setting up the PC, I feel more confident with the bootloader setup, and now I'm at least ready for more OS releases in the future from Apple. Because of this experience, I went ahead and tried to install El Capitan on an HP laptop to see if it were possible. I'm still working on it in my downtime, but if I get anywhere with it, I'll be sure to document and show you guys. So, that'll do it for me. This is Steve signing off, and thanks for watching.